We are going to be talking about the philosophy of race, racism, colorism, which I think is what most people imagine when they actually say the word racism, and finally, prejudice. Now, these subjects are usually a very, what would you say, a tender subject, a a subject in which someone feels as if they're able to be justified past a point of normal relative judgment. And what I mean by that is that I feel like sometimes when people think that they're talking about race and racism, that somehow that their argument trumps all arguments. That, it is the injustice of racism and the injustice of, well, whatever it is that they're imagining that is the end all and the be all for all arguments, for all philosophical discussions, that their hurts are stronger and more justified or valued because they are basing it off of this racial prejudice. Now, obviously, I don't believe that to be the case. I believe that philosophy and the law of Gnostic nature, I suppose, the law of understanding things through your own mind and being, is far more valuable and important than trying to define things through a racial structure. Furthermore, there is something very, very disturbing and even disgusting with the idea of making these large groups of different peoples into these very small categories of people. And what I mean by that is that race is very valid to define someone as, whereas defining them by the color of their skin is beyond ignorant. Because if you were to do such a thing, you might say, okay, well, I've got this Irish person and I've got this Korean person, and their color of their skin looks fairly similar depending on how much sun they get. They must be the same. And you couldn't be more wrong to the state that, and by that I mean that Koreans have this completely different view of some philosophies and thoughts and even symbolisms, at least very different from what would be their Irish white equivalency, if we're all just white. Unless you want to somehow say that, Koreans are what, yellow or something? You're trying to, see, again, you can see how racist and insane it is to classify people in these very small boxes. The idea that you would try to make someone who is Japanese and someone who is Korean both the same idyllic race of Asian is insane. Same with Chinese and, Japanese, or same with Chinese and Filipino. The differences are so grand and so vast that it is insane. And the same can be said for the black races, the African races, which is the Congolese are nothing like the Ethiopians, and though they're nothing like the South Africans, and nor are the Eritreans anything like someone from Senegal or Uganda. They are much different people. Some of them might be a little bit closer in philosophies and thoughts and ideals, but they are not by any means or any structure of the idea the same even kind of person. They have the same color of skin, but that is the same as saying that a Spanish person has the same essentially color of skin as an English person, and they are completely different in so many ways, including passions and, forms of thought and reason and, love and, sex and everything is so different. And same with an Eritrean to a Congolese. Same with a Japanese to a Mongolian. These peoples are so very different, even if they are from a very close, or what seemingly is close area proximity to each other. They're not the same thing. They're not. And so when we try to say the words black and white, or, God forbid we say yellow for, when we're talking about Asians, I think it's just so childish. It's an asinine form to make things so reductive and so small. It is wrong of us to make things be so childish and so without thought and without the facets and complications which make a human actually a human. Because it is in those distinctions that you can say, well, maybe I might be a little bit racist in, that I may not be a fan of second and third generation African Americans because they just haven't been very kind to me in any way throughout my life, versus a first generation African who is almost exclusively kind, good at their jobs and wants to be a productive member of society. There is none of that recessive thought that somehow they were slaves 200 years ago, and that I somehow was the master of the slaves, even though I didn't move to America in my lineage until 1906 or something. So we definitely didn't have any slaves. There was no slaves in Romania. So I just don't quite understand what the ideal is. And that's why you could say, well, it's very important to define that maybe a first generation or second generation Eritrean is much different from their child or the child of their child. And maybe they are incredibly different from former descendants of slaves who, maybe it's a cultural thing where you're literally having it so people are, being raised by people who are much older and we're living in a completely different world than the world we're living in now. That's what I often think. And when we make things so reductive, when we say black, then we are somehow mixing in first and second generation Ethiopians with fifth or sixth generation being raised by the third or fourth generation American Africans, which may be much more prejudiced. Let's say it that way. They may be much more racist because they were taught through cultural, ideals that, there's something wrong with another race, which is really how you get racism. You've got, these, generational, African Americans who are basically making it so we have a perpetuated racism because they are being raised by people who are much older usually than their initial parents. Usually the grandparents are raising them, and those people are so much older in comparison to the child that the world that they used to live in, it almost doesn't even exist anymore. And they can't really recognize that because they don't go out into that world, which, maybe scared them with Jim Crow or scared them with, vile racism that actually occurred, from whites to blacks. Versus now, where it seems like that just doesn't occur at all, and only blacks seem to be, and blacks, see, again, it's a very reductive term, but only second and third generation, maybe third and fourth generation African Americans minimum, and past that, seem to have this very racist attitude towards white people in general. And, I don't think that it's wrong to say that. I don't think it's reductive to say that. I think that, we're actually trying to get to the root of the problem when we say those things, because it doesn't seem to be even close to the case when we talk about someone who is a first or second generation African who is recent to the country and doesn't have the same cultural biases that have been wrought in the African American culture. So let's like try and break that down a little bit from my own personal perspective, and let's try and get to what is being posed as race, racism, and colorism. Because for what it's worth, I will say that there might be some value in racism, but there is zero value in colorism. Colorism being the ideal that you are affronted by the color of someone's skin. That is very childish and stupid. But to be affronted by the culture of someone else, and then to have that be related also to the color of their skin somehow, so that you recognize that when you see this person, you're like, oh, well, this person has a culture that I don't like. Now, that might be again, we're getting into colorism very quickly, because you say, okay, well, this person that I don't know has this color of skin, so now I think that they have the same culture I don't like, well, not knowing that maybe their culture is different because they may be not part of the African American kind of cult, versus they could be first generation Africans and be part of a completely different culture that is completely rational still. I think that there's maybe some level of irrationality in the African American culture right now. But it is what it is. I feel that way because I'm not a fan of the culture, and I haven't, ever been treated very well by the people who would claim to, propose a love for black culture. I mean, like the way that they've interacted with me, and I find it, kind of, childish. But at the same time, I've had some really wonderful people of black skin who have been, very helpful and very wonderful to me throughout my life. Some of them being third and fourth generation, at least, African Americans, so they were part of that, culture, but they were individuals themselves and were, above it. Or people who were usually first or second generation immigrants, and they were always very, very kind and very nice to me within the confines of our, interactions. So I wouldn't say that, I am colorist, but there are some, I think everybody gets some racist, tendencies within their thought process and their form. And if you are able to allow people the complexities that they have naturally, then you may be able to justify what it is that you're actually disliking. Instead of saying, oh, no, I'm a racist and I hate all blacks. No, that's not true. That's not what you're doing, and if you think that's what you're doing, then you probably are wrong. And if you are, well, then you're actually just being very, very biased and very stupid and very prejudiced. You should have a willingness to see people as individuals, even if you maybe naturally will categorize them within your own brain, because that's the way that the brain functions, and that's the way that it actually works in real time. So let's go on to the actual definitions that they're trying to give here. So a race is a grouping of humans based on shared physical or social qualities. If they say genetic and social qualities, I don't know about the social qualities. I think a race is a grouping of humans based on shared genetic qualities. In a category is generally viewed as distinct by society. Yes. Okay. They're usually distinct by shared genetic and shared geographic qualities. So they are often from the same area and they have the same genetics. That is actually what defines a race, not shared physical or social qualities. No. Because if we're all tall, that doesn't mean we're all from the same race. That's stupid. What the fuck's that mean? If we all say hello the same way, that doesn't mean we're all from the same race. It means we're from the same culture. What? A very, very bad start for this. Okay, so the term was first used to refer to speakers of a common language. I suppose they didn't understand much about genetics then, sure. And then to denote national affiliations. By the 17th century, the term began to refer to physical traits. What is that, from phrenology or something, where they used to try to measure the size of a man's head and the way that it, the circumference and the way that it was, knotted and, or rounded and smooth to determine whether he was a good or bad human. I mean, what do you mean? By the 17th century, the term began to refer to physical traits. I guess there are some things where, there are some races that have physical differences in the way that their bodies interact with the world. One can say that the Native American race, in a very broad sense, again, we're using it kind of in the sense of like the red man. Again, see, so the black man, the red man, the yellow man, the white man, that's crazy. It's so bad. But let's say, for, the sake of argument, though, Native Americans, though, their bodies physiologically were not used to the drinking of alcohol. And their bodies would actually imbibe and, take in the alcohol in a different way. It would be more of a problem for their physical form. And they would get drunk faster. They would have less ability to clean it out with their livers. And one could say that that is obviously related to the idea that Europeans have been drinking this alcohol and have been making their bodies, accustomed to the processing of it over the course of thousands and thousands of years. So that is what one could say is a physical trait that is racially different. Maybe also you could say that that is maybe a shared physical, quality. And, you could say that, we generally view like a Native American as distinct from a European, and because of that, that shared physical quality of being able to drink and process it more easily is, so their definition isn't completely wrong, but I would say that, the genetics is the reason why they don't have the ability to process the liquor the same way that a European's genetics does. It's a genetic thing again. So, let's see here. Excuse me. Not much more really to say about race. Let's look at the images that we have on race. Funny that all of the images on race are actually about, well, there's one that's about, the ideal of, but see, this isn't race. This is blacks and whites. This isn't race. This is, a bunch, this is not race. This is, you should have, a white person, an African person, an Asian person, I suppose, Eastern European, like Asian, I suppose. This isn't, maybe a second, black hand to represent, Egypt or something, like the different color. This is kind of weird how it's just like whites and blacks. It's kind of odd, maybe this hand looks a little Indian, I don't know. It's a little olive. But, okay, so when we look at race, the first thing that comes up is, and this is kind of strange, is the ideal of competitions between, people in a race. And that's kind of strange that, that's kind of like a synonym almost for the idea of, the fights that, people have over their race. I don't know, it's kind of stretching it, but it's interesting that all you see are images of people in the middle of a race. And you don't see very much in relation to the race of individuals here. I bet that's true as we go down too. Yeah, because, ooh, there's some butt there, huh? Yeah, there's just not really much to do with, which is good, I suppose, When you think of images, I would hate to see, so many images of these being about race and ethnicity. So that's probably all we need to talk about for race. So let's talk about racism itself. So racism, the ideal of having a prejudged view about a individual race, is something that we all do. We all, for whatever reason, think that Irish people are more likely to be drunks because it's, part of the lexicon of normal society for some reason. We think English people are supposed to have bad teeth. We think that, I don't know, maybe Asian, Chinese, Japanese people are much more fastidious about, doing work and doing homework than the average. We know that oh, that's kind of cruel to to do. I won't use that one. Um, well, see, this is the problem. I'm sitting here. I'm trying to think of something that is racist for black people, and see again, it's so reductive. Um, because it's not true for all black people. It's true for many, second or third or fourth generation African Americans that, they seem to have a higher crime rates, and maybe it's a poverty thing. But see, that's not really I don't want to, be, negative when we're talking about, the ideals of, yeah, well, I don't know. See, so there's the problem that we can kind of come into play immediately is we say, okay, so we don't have these very complex and defined terms, like third or fourth generation African Americans being looked at as potentially the higher crime rate people versus first generation Africans, to make that kind of distinction that there is a problem with these inner cities and with these poverty levels. And so it kind of makes it so that I can't even say something like, African Americans, are more likely to, do criminal acts than the average, white person in a per capita basis, versus one amount of per capita versus the other. And, it's evidenced in places like Detroit and Chicago, where the crime rates are so incredibly high, and where the amount of African Americans that are third and fourth generation are very large as well. And that's not to say that a first and second generation African couldn't come over and be very, very criminalistic and even very racist in their thought process. I'm sure that there are plenty of, people that come over to, do crime over, anything that is legitimate. But I will also say that, that's probably not the norm. It's probably not the norm for, and it's not the norm for most, African Americans that are even third or fourth generation. There's just some of these hot spots that are so bad for, some of these cultures, and they, basically are self-aggrandizing, replicating situations where these people are very poor, they're very dysfunctional in the way that they interact with one another. There's a high amount of guns and gun violence, and so I don't know. It's difficult because when we talk, there's supposed to be like this undertone that somehow slavery makes it so all of these things are somehow justified, that all of these third and fourth generation Africans are doing, that it's somehow justified, and that somehow they've been treated with some kind of horrible racist motif throughout their entire life, and the entire system is racist and systematically fighting against them in every moment. And I couldn't say how stupid that sounds to someone like me who actually looks at it from an objective perspective, because when we say things like the system is fighting against me, and there are things in place like affirmative action, you just sound like an idiot. You sound like an idiot when you say the system is fighting against me by giving me a job that I may not have gotten otherwise, because of a system that's literally forcing them to look at my candidacy before others. That's not something that any white person necessarily did versus a black person in any time in the founding and the functioning of our republic as it stands now. Yeah, it's very difficult because again, let's talk about even the idea of racism, because it could be of value to some justifications in some forms, right? You could say that if and this is again bad at using African Americans that are third or fourth generation again, and some of the crime statistics related to them, you could say well, if the average black person is more likely to cause me, harm then maybe I should try to, stay away from them, and that's where huge racism. But see, if you can at least get complex enough to say, okay, well, I know that it's not this person, it's not just someone with black skin, it's someone who has, this kind of cultural bias, these kind of terms and terminology related to white people or whiteness, and you can kind of see or feel the way that they interact and say, oh, no, okay, I can feel that this person is not someone I actually want to be around. And, it's usually that they're actually racist. They're the ones that are the racist ones saying, I don't want you because of this, or I want to take advantage of you because of this, and I don't care about, or, maybe it has nothing to do with you being a different race than them. Maybe they are just bad people. That can happen too. As for my interactions with what I would say is a pretty racist situation in society in general, I can recall moments in time where we would have, and I went to a school that, had a bunch of, poor black kids bust in. Poor kids, I guess they weren't all black, but a large majority of them were. And so we had a, overall school of like 4,000 people when it should have been under, 2,000. And, for the most part, I had really great relations with anyone that was, black. These were all African Americans, mostly a third or fourth generation, one or two that were, maybe a second generation. And third or fourth, I mean by that, they're at least third or fourth generation. And, I had some really good friends that were black people. I had some, black people that, would stand up, for me against other, black people. It wasn't an issue of race. There was nothing like that. It was an issue of ideals and of what was right and what was wrong. But I do recall this one time. Now, I was kind of a, bad kid, so I was selling, weed in high school, right? But I remember this one time, this black kid who knew I was selling it saw me, take some out from the back of my, backpack, and he stole it when I wasn't, looking, basically. Or while I was walking, he, like, literally undid my backpack and stole it, and I saw him run off after he took it. And there was this, it was the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life. We were all, that's what's so strange, we were all supposed to fight, is the way that I pose it, because we, and by we I mean almost every single white person in the damn fucking, place that was my friend, we went over to, I was supposed to be fighting this kid, at lunch, and we went over, and he had all of these black kids behind him, and I was just like, oh my god, what is this? Is this, like, literally a race fucking war? Like, what is this? Because I didn't care at all. I cared that he stole my shit and he's a cunt, right? But I was like, we were supposed to fight, and I'm sitting there, and I was like, what are we even going to explain once we're done fighting? There's this huge fucking brawl, What are we supposed to do? What are you thinking, Mostly because I couldn't, what am I going to beat them up and take back my weed, and then what, are they going to, come and break up the fight, and now I've got, weed, it's, none of it made sense, and it was really bad. I mean, in reality, what should have happened was, I should have had the ability to just cut people's throats with my mind and just cut his throat, while he was running off, so I could just go pick it back up and someone could clean up his body, that's in reality what should happen, but, nothing is perfect. No, it's probably not right either, right? Because it's just a childish, theft that, is not very kind and very rude and probably shows that he's a bad person, but, at the same time. All right, so, I mean, that's one time where it seemed like, for no reason whatsoever, just because I was white and he was black, there was going to be basically a race war at our fucking school. Now, I just stood down because I didn't want to literally fight and then have, all of these other people fight too, and it seemed very wrong. It was wrong. It was very bad. But like I said, same instance, I'm selling weed there at school, and, this guy Floyd is, hanging out with me. He sold weed too, and I give this bag to this guy for $5, and he doesn't give me the $5, and Floyd, like, literally, like, was like, hey, fucking give that back to him or I'm going to kick your ass. And, he just didn't respect me because I'm white, and I guess, maybe I should have just been cracking some fucking skulls so that they respected me regardless of my skin color, right? I suppose, you're supposed to just take a fucking pipe to someone's head and, then they won't fucking steal from you. I don't know, I'm just a better person than that, so I don't actually steal from people to begin with. You know, especially in such a weird setting where, you know, you're selling an illegal drug, you know, in a school setting. Oh, so dumb. All right, other moments of what I would call kind of like racist, you know, things that I saw. There seems to be a real enjoyment with black people chastising white people for saying the word nigger in any context. Whether they're saying it because they're trying to be, you know, relating to them, when they're saying it, you know, to be incendiary, you know, which I could understand if someone's trying to insult you while you might be insulted. But when somebody's just being like, oh, you know, it's cool, nigger, you know, I don't say it right, a nigga. So I don't say it right because I say the actual word, the word nigger, which means ignorant. I don't, you know, care to reference it in reference to black or white people. I don't care. You know, that's not what I'm doing. So, you know, but the other time where this occurred in my existence was this, you know, black guy, like, went to go hit this girl after she said, you know, calm down, nigga. You know, like, literally, like, saying nothing. He's like, oh, you can't say the word nigga, you're not fucking black, blah, 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 blah. And I just fucking choked him out. You know, I choked him out, and fucking he just slumped to the ground, and, you know, had a little yelling match and a, like, little fist fight afterwards with his friends, but, you know, fucking whatever. You know, I'm not going to take somebody, like, yelling at someone because they said a word. Fuck you. I'll just choke you out. You know, I probably should have just held on so you just didn't, you know, wake up. That's kind of how I feel about it when you're such a cunt. And, you know, that's how I feel about, you know, that interaction with the word nigger. Is that if you think that because I'm white I can't say the word nigger, well, guess what, you racist piece of shit? I can. I don't care what you think because I have skin color that you don't like, that I can't say a word. Fuck you. All right? That's how it actually works. That's how actual reality works. You don't get to say, I'm not going to listen to you because, you know, you have a color of skin. You're not allowed to do something because you have a color of skin. Is that the same as saying you're not allowed to enter in the front of a hotel because you're black-skinned and you have to enter through the back because you're, black-skinned? No, yeah, it is. It's the exact goddamn same. That's why we don't do that. That's why we don't say to people, because you're white, you can't say the word nigger. That's why we don't do that. We don't do those things. If you're not gay, you can still say the word faggot. It doesn't matter, and actually faggot means a bundle of sticks, which is, you know, originally supposed to mean a burdensome or heavy woman, you know, and it's not even relating to gay men at all. But, you know, maybe a gay man can be said to be a burdensome or heavy, you know, person because they're not doing it. But see, that's an individual thing. But so, again, let's go over, you know, the ideal of if you're white, say nigger if you want to. If someone wants to fight you over that, they're fighting you over the fact that they're racist and they want you not to say something because of your skin color. All right? If you're saying it to a black person to incite them to be angry, like you're saying, hey, you stupid nigger, you know, you're insulting them. It doesn't matter what you say. That's not kind and it's rude, and if they get upset at that, you know, they shouldn't be getting upset at the fact that you're calling them a certain word. What they should be getting upset at is the fact that you're insulting and you're being, you know, a general cunt. You know? So, let's, look real quick at what, you know, it shows when we show racism. Well, first off, they seem to show that there's only one or two races, white and black, which is insane because, as we discussed before, there's maybe a few color spectrums, but even there's not only just two. There's definitely olive skin color. There is kind of a yellow or a tawny skin color. There is a very, very kind of even a dark olive, you know, color that, you know, is different from what you might call, you know, a very dark or, you know, like a midnight kind of black, you know, African versus a very, very light, you know, African, you know, look, which is more olive, like, you know, maybe Beyonce or something, you know. So, I mean, the idea that they're showing this in a very white-black form is just insane. Also, to have some of the first images that come up be images of the KKK, America for Whites, you know, American racism in the 1920s. That's over 100 years ago, and no one has acted anywhere near like that in a great amount of time. There hasn't been a single burning cross anywhere in the same kind of setup where you literally have a guy come into his front door with a shotgun and all these people being like, you got to get the fuck out of here, we're going to kill you. That ain't happening anymore, and it shouldn't happen, and it never. And guess what? That guy with a shotgun, he should have just started blasting into the fucking crowd, killed a fucking couple people. They come burn his house down, fucking whatever. You got a couple of them, before you move on, because they're going to force you to move on or kill you anyway, right? So, I mean, I'm on the ideal front, I don't give a shit your skin color. I hold to ideals first and foremost. And that's why the same thing with the word nigger. You literally, if I'm white and I want to say the word nigger and you try to say because you're black that I can't say it, the ideal is actually that you're trying to be fascist and tell me what I can and can't do based on the color of my skin. So you're a racist. It's got nothing to do with past prejudices, past indiscretions, past problems. Fuck that. You can't play that card. It's very strange. We have a black guy here. It says, we have value. No, you don't necessarily. Not because you're white or you're black. You have value because someone values you. You don't have value just because. You don't get respect just because. You don't have value just because. If you are literally, a thing which only does harm, you don't have value. So, you can't just say we have value. You have to have value. You don't even have to say it when you have it. So that's a strange thing. Stop racist attacks. I agree. There are far too many racist attacks from black people onto white people. And there's far too few the other way around for the narrative to be so completely juxtaposed as it is. So, yeah, we should stop racism, against, or racist attacks. Like the ones that you saw during the Black Lives Matter riots, where literally, because they were white, people were being singled out and attacked. So that was such an incredible time or moment in time that, it really, like, if there was a moment where I would want to, pick up the sword and just start slaying everyone, in the biblical sense of, Jesus no longer being the preacher and picking up the sword ideal, that was one of those moments where it's like you had people attacking complete and utter strangers for an ideal and, being so obstinate and so childish and hateful. It literally made me want to, kill. It made me want to kill. And, I've removed myself so far from society I wouldn't, have any ability to interact with someone that's so stupid, which is nice. But, I mean, to imagine that I would be driving through a setup of a bunch of people and they would try to hit at my car and stuff, I'd run them over and then I'd fucking put it in reverse and hit them as hard as I could and I'd just fucking do a couple of donuts, And I know that sounds really awful and wrong, but guess what? You don't get to fucking control and fight and destroy me just because you want to. And if you want to, try to, when I have what is essentially a massive weapon that I'm driving around, and you think that you're smart enough to realize that you could, hit against the car and scare the shit out of people, they're literally driving around a massive metal bludgeon. And you just don't recognize that. And see, that's the point of what I said, is that if they did that to me, I'd be like, all right, well, I guess I've got to drive this metal bludgeon into all of you and teach you all a fucking lesson. And I know it's insane. And, I would say that if there's any way around it, but I'm not one that will ever say that protesting and the blocking of streets makes any sense. Unless it's for highly political means, like you're blocking the streets of political, people so that they can't get to a job where they would have passed a law, that you are against. I can understand that, but blocking normal roads doesn't make sense. That doesn't spread your message. Your message is spread just as well with you just being on the side of the road. So let's look a little bit more at some of the images they have for racism. A lot of mention of it, seeming to say that racism is a very big problem, but women of the Klan, so stupid, because all of those women are dead, and the people who they bore probably don't even, and bore I mean created, probably don't think even close to the way they think. And if they think even relatively in the same aspect, it's probably much less concentrated at this point. It's not as vile. So, we are all humans. Yes. No, duh. Strange how she only has females on there. Um, Racism, dehumanizing. I'm not sure. Maybe this is about child sex trafficking. It says victims mount as extreme something. Uh, Systemic racism, wealth gap. Well, see, but that's insane to say that there's systemic racism and that's what creates a wealth gap. Because there are plenty of, African Americans who have a shitload of money and waste it on a whole bunch of things, including just high rents. There are a lot of people who waste a lot of money who are white, who are, again, it's very reductive. And there are, it's such a cultural thing and not a race thing. Because there are also a large amount of races that are, probably doing incredibly well, like first and second generation Ethiopians. And they're probably, got a huge wealth gap between them and third and fourth generation African Americans. So, and then we see when we're talking about racism, there seems to be some Black Lives Matter, signs. See, even with the most racist sign here, go back to African Negroes. It doesn't say that their lives don't matter. That's what's so strange is that, the red hair... Here's something about Black Lives Matter that I thought when I first heard it. Are they asking a question? I mean, really. Because the question never existed before Black Lives Matter. That is to say that there was never a question. There was never even a thought that black lives didn't matter. Of course they mattered. That's why we literally ended, a lot of the racist, policies that existed in America that were incredibly against, the ideal that black lives matter. Things like, well, when there was whites only and blacks only things, that didn't necessarily mean that we didn't care about them. It just meant that there was a separation. But, that's probably not right in any real sense, right? Because, you should just have it so everybody can just do everything, and there isn't, that kind of separation never would work in a real sense. It's terrible. It's a terrible idea. But, there's something very strange about the statement Black Lives Matter, because it almost is like asking a question where there's no there was no question before, and there still isn't a question now. It's just so stupid that they have even posed it in such a way. All right. Okay, racism's still alive. They just be concealing it. Well, see, this is that cultural thing I was talking about. They just be concealing it. See, why not just write it so it's not stupid? Racism is still alive. It's just concealed now. Would be much better. And I know you say to yourself, oh, well, you're being very nitpicky with her grammar. But, no, that's a cultural thing where she doesn't care about her grammar. And, I don't like that. I want her to care about her grammar because it makes her argument stronger. And otherwise, her argument's weaker, and it sounds like she's stupid. Racism's still alive. They just be concealing it, dog. I mean, really, why not end it with dog? Because that's just how it sounds. It sounds lame. Racism is the greatest evil? No, evil is the greatest evil, you dumb bitch. The greatest evil? No. Someone who is evil for the sake of being evil without racist intent is much more evil. Yeah, a lot of weird stuff. Racism is never justified. Then why does, then why do we have affirmative action? Why do you, probably, who's holding that sign, think that, the average black person should or could say the word nigger, but the average white person shouldn't? Why is that, justified that a white person can't do something that a black person can do? Isn't that racism? And I'm talking for this person, not knowing them, but, for what it's worth, I'm willing to bet that they believe that. And that's a problem. It's a goddamn problem. Let's see what this is Nelson Mandela here. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. That's a philosophical question, whether or not it's easier to love or to hate something. Probably is healthier to love something than to hate something, but I don't know if it's easier to do as a thing, or as a creature, as an entity in general. Yeah, so, you can see that racism is a pandemic. No, it's really not. It's probably, like a very, very low grade, viral load in some areas, and it's not a problem in almost everywhere else. Okay, see, but then we have things like just this woman just holding a sign that says, "You're a racist." And it's so badly done, the image. You can't see that because my dumb face is in the way. Yeah, it's right here. No, I'm not a racist. I think that you are a racist, though. Or at the very least, you're a colorist. Because I don't think you know enough about, individual white culture to know all the different races, probably. But maybe you do, and maybe you just hate them all. Yeah, so you are a racist, maybe. I don't know. I'm willing to bet you're not smart enough to know all that, so you're probably a colorist. So let's talk about the idea of colorism real quick. Because racism is maybe justified in some ways. That is to say, if you could say to yourself, I find that on average the people who are Irish, will drink or offer me drinks much more often. So I'd not like to spend time with them because I'm a recovering alcoholic. That could be your MO. You could say, I'm not, for what it's worth. But, this is just a theoretical. You could say to yourself, well, I need to be racist towards the average, Irish person. Someone with freckles and red hair, I'm not going to go near because I know that they may be more likely to drink, and I'm more likely to, drink with them. You could say that. And that's, again, it's a cultural thing more than a race thing, if it's true. It may not be true in our day and age anymore, but, maybe it is. So, the same thing goes for, if you can identify, and see, there's the problem, if you can actually identify who is, literally being more criminal in a society, if it was only third and fourth generation African Americans, or if it was only a certain type of white people that were very poor, perhaps, and maybe it was always a poor thing. If you could identify those things, you might be able to say, okay, well, maybe I'm not even a racist at all. Maybe I'm like a richest or a poorest, or I literally am. I don't want to spend time with poor people because they're more likely to rob and to hurt me and to be this or that, and maybe that's how you would have to justify it. See, I don't think that there's maybe too much justification for racism ever, because people are individuals. But, it feels to me like, racism is something that's happening more and more on the white-black color spectrum towards white people than black people. And, it's not even racism at that point, is it? Because, again, we're not talking about the complex individual and their individual race. We're talking about just their skin color. So let's move on to colorism. And colorism is prejudice or bias against persons on the basis of their skin color or complexion, often among persons of the same racial identification. No. That's a bad definition. So they're trying to say that black people who have darker black skin versus black people who have, light olive skin, that's the colorism. That, you fucking got that olive skin. You're not a real black person. Or, I guess, within the structure of maybe a Korean society, there is some colorism with the idea of if you're tan, you're probably more poor and more likely to have been out in the fields. So that's something, I guess, that could be, what they're maybe trying to say about colorism, but I don't agree with that. See, they're trying to say that colorism is shadeism, which maybe is a good way to describe what they're saying. Shadeism or skin tone, discrimination. Okay. That's a little bit better. Is a form of prejudice or discrimination which people who are usually members of the same race. See, I don't like this, though. I don't like this definition because it's trying to make colorism not be the correct term for what the average person is doing when they say they don't like white people, or they don't like black people, or they don't like, Asians, I guess, if they want to be colorist, and yellow people, if they're being real racist, or I don't like red people, those fucking Native Americans, no. What I think that they're not doing it because of a shade difference within their own race. What they're doing when they do that is they're literally saying, I don't like you because of the color of your skin. I don't care for the color of your skin. And that's really what's happening when people think that they're being racist. They're actually being a colorist, I suppose. And they are saying, I don't like your skin color. And that's why I don't like you. That's why I'm prejudging you. That's why I'm racist towards you, is because of your skin color. Nothing to do with your race, because your race is a separate identity from your color of your skin, right? Although you could say that some races might have darker skin, might have lighter skin, might have blah, blah, blah. Yes, you might be able to apply that. But again, it's an individual thing, I'm sure. So they're saying something about, in Jamaica, which is carried over to the present, rarely will dark and light people commingle. Well, that is, I would say skin tone discrimination within the same, or within close to the same relative skin tone. So if you're black, they're too light. If they're too light, or if you're too light, you don't like them because they're so black. Whatever. But again, we need to redefine racism as colorism. All right, it's that simple. Most people don't know the race of another person. They aren't complex enough to understand that, so they don't like them because of the color of their skin. It has nothing to do with their race. It has nothing to do with their culture. It sometimes has to do with their culture, but usually, when we're talking, in clear racist, sentiments, it's actually a colorist sentiment. It is a sentiment that the color of the other person's skin is something that is disliked. It has nothing to do with their race, usually. Culture can be a reason to discriminate, and I can completely justify and understand that ideal. If you, if the average, third or fourth generation African American speaks in, a bad dialect where they say things like, what did that woman say? Racism's never, or they just be concealing it, or whatever she said. If you don't want your daughter or your son to talk like that, you might say to yourself, I don't want you to be around them because their culture is shit. Their culture doesn't even care about, speaking in a way that, is understandable and is, punctuated. No, I don't want you around them. And they might say, oh, well, you don't want us to be around, your kid because, we're black. And you're like, no, it's because culturally you're shit. Go get a better culture, get a better form, and then I don't care what your skin color is, It's the way that you're affecting the people around me. It's got nothing to do with the color of your skin. That's, I think, a much more clear and present way to address the issues that you have with someone. Because, usually it is not going to be their skin color. It's going to be the way they act and the way they think. I mean, I have seen some people on Facebook that I thought were, well, they were my friends when we were younger, but how far off the deep end they rode made it so, their culture is so different from mine. It's not necessarily an African American culture, but it's so different from mine that I would never want to really interact with them. And I wouldn't want my children to necessarily. And it's usually that they're on heavy drugs or this or that. They have obvious issues. But okay, so let's move on from colorism. Well, let's look at images for colorism real quick, because I think they'll be funny. Yeah, I knew they'd be funny. So they think that colorism is somehow really just the fight within a black community about lighter shades of black. No. The problem is that you actually dislike, the color of somebody's skin, and you're basically a bad person for that. This is strange, because I can see why this woman over here is so much more attractive than this woman over here. But maybe that's just to me. Maybe this woman has more makeup on. Maybe she's less, taken care of. Maybe she's, it's a lot of sun that she's had, too. So I can see, why you might want some colorism in some ways, when it comes to the, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. See, for me, it's all about attractiveness, like this woman, I'm not really into the hair. She's got a great looking face, though. She's got a great looking chest. Cardi B, I like the hair more. Not so into the face. The face is okay. Looks a little weird there. But yeah, so, again, this is their attempt to define colorism, but really what they should be doing, because nobody actually cares about the race of someone, they only care about their skin color usually. You're white, you're not Romanian, you're not English, you're not German, you're not American, or first generation American, or the founding, generation of Americans. You're not, this or that. No, you're white, and they're black. They're not, third generation African Americans from Congo. No, they're not, Eritreans. No, they're not, Ethiopian. They're not, South African. No, they're black. And so really what's happening is a colorism thing. It's got nothing to do with, race. Okay, so finally, prejudice. And prejudice, in a very simple thing, meaning before, Judas, or, the idea of judging something. So judging something before. Prejudice is an affective feeling towards a person based on their perceived group membership. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's judging something before you know it. Let's not make this about something else. It's literally judging something before you know it. So that is what happens often when you try to do something like, say, be racist in a basic sense. You are attempting to be prejudiced towards a group so that you can make a better decision. And, when we talk about the ideal of maybe Irish people drink more, then maybe you shouldn't, if you are recovering as an alcoholic, maybe you should be prejudiced towards hanging out with Irish people, especially, later at night or in a bar or something. Yeah, maybe that would be a horrible idea for you. And maybe, in that same sense that, if you're walking home at night and there's some, or there's two really large, black men who, seem kind of scary and, a third or fourth generation that don't really care about, and they're saying, look at this cracker that's coming up while you're fucking walking up there. Maybe it'd be better to fucking cross the street. I don't know. Maybe that's a good prejudice to have. Who knows, I don't know. I would also like to say that, you should have the jurisprudence within yourself to have the ability to defend yourself even against two people. So, just shoot them both. It's fine. So, is it right to have a prejudice at all? Well, no and yes. As we said in these last two kind of examples, like maybe there are more, there is a truth to third and fourth generation Africans being more violent. And maybe if you're walking through an area and you see what appears to be essentially a gang, maybe you should, cross, or go a different way. Maybe that is a really stupid thing to do. And let's talk about maybe prejudice not related to people. Should you have a prejudice towards going down an alleyway in a darkened city in the middle of the night? Probably. You should probably have a prejudgment about whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, and maybe you shouldn't do it. Maybe the same thing applies for just about, anything. You should have a prejudice towards, driving, at night. Maybe you should, because, it's more likely you're going to hit something because you can't see as much, and you can't see you or something. There are prejudices that make sense and are functional and justifiable, but when we try to apply them to people, what we find often is that individuals will always trump every prejudgment usually that you will have. Sometimes they will hold to it to a T, but most of the time you will find that there are individuals completely outside of what you had imagined were the form of that person, and so prejudice can lead to some very bad things. I'm going to tell you this story. I was working, at this pizza place just delivering pizzas, and my manager was this black guy. He was nice enough. He was half Hawaiian, half black, and he was a very prejudiced person. But I did get to him eventually, and what I said was, all right, so you got two people on a cliff. One of them's white, one of them's black. Which one do you save? And he says, all right, well, I save the black person. And I'm like, all right, well, you just did that without even asking anything about them. The black person's actually like a convicted rapist, and he's a pedophile, and the white person is your wife. And yeah, you didn't realize you married a white person, and that white person was your wife, but you just decided based on your prejudged, notions that you're just going to save the black person because. And, it was only after, a few days that he actually came back to me. He was like, actually I wouldn't just save, someone just based on their race. And I was like, well, thank God you're not fucking completely stupid. Thank God you would actually, think about who it is that you're saving, why you would save them versus, and I gave him the option, oh, you're only allowed to save one, you're right. But, why it is that you would save that person. You shouldn't have a prejudice that's so massive that you literally just choose one over the other without even having a second thought. You don't look at, who is this person to you? You don't know. Maybe they are nothing. And if he started off with, okay, these are just two complete strangers, well, maybe, sure. Maybe he has a prejudice towards saving the black person over the white person. That's fine. But I didn't make it two complete strangers. I said, there's a white person and a black person. I just made it very bland. And he just said this immediately. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to apply a few things to these people, and you're not going to, and you still have to choose what you chose before because you didn't even think about it. You didn't even imagine that maybe that white person was your wife. You didn't think about that ideal or that possibility, right? But, obviously he would save his wife over any fucking random person that was, the same color as him, right? That's stupid, right? Of course he would. Unless that, black, person was maybe his mother or something, and then you could say, oh, well, now I've got an actual decision between my mother and my wife, and now the skin color doesn't matter anymore, see? And that's where I was trying to get him to. And I think I got him to him. Either that or, he said it to someone else, talking about what I had said to him, and they said, oh my God, you're a racist son of a bitch. You better go back and say, different, because they could literally sue this company, because you're a racist. And, of course I wouldn't do that, but, that's also a possibility. But I like to think that, he thought it through and changed his mind. So let's just look real quick at what some of the images of prejudice are. Prejudice, being blind to, things. Yeah, it's maybe prejudice. But again, it's really prejudging. It's not being blind to things. It's actually having a pre-decision made that is making it so that you're not even seeing reality. Prejudice is a child of ignorance. Prejudice is not the child of ignorance. That's not true. It's almost the opposite. It's the child of maybe false knowledge, potentially, if it's something that's bad, or it's potentially, a very decent prejudice, like we talked about with the idea of going into a dark alleyway, to cut, a street instead of going to the end of the block, in the middle of the night. Maybe you should have a prejudice towards that. Maybe that's not ignorant to be prejudiced towards, a dark alleyway in the middle of the night. So let's look some more, a lot of just bullshit. Um, yeah, not much worth really talking about here in this whole, ideals of prejudice. Not sure what this image is right here of this black woman taking off this white woman's face. My culture made me do it. Yeah, it is actually your culture that makes you think and do things. Yeah, it's not your skin color. All right, so, I think that we've gotten a pretty good, a pretty good little discussion down here about the ideals of race and racism and prejudice, the ideals of colorism, and the ideals that maybe, what's really happening in our world today is actually a colorism and it's got nothing to do with racism because the race of the person is never discussed. It's always the color of their skin that's discussed. So I think that, that's pretty much all I've got to say about it. If you believe that skin color is somehow a effective marker for having a prejudice bias towards another person, well, you're wrong. It's a bad way to look at the world. It's a bad way to try to view the world. It's a bad way to interpret things because individuals will always make you into a fool because individuals are not the collective. So, last things maybe to be said. If you're black and you say that a white person can't say the word nigger, you are a racist. All right? It's not the other way around. You're trying to say because of their skin color that they can't say something. That is racist. Well, colorist. Another thing that needs to be said. Racism is not real because no one gives a shit about the individual races of a person. What they care about is the color of their skin. So everything that we're seeing is actually colorism, and it's just a disgusting display because it has nothing to do with the actual qualities of the person. If we are talking about the qualities of the person, we're usually talking about their culture, and there are some major cultural flaws that can be found in the African American culture, maybe within some of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant cultures as well, and maybe some of the other very orthodox cultures that are said to be white. Again, very reductive. So, I think that's all I have to say on the subject. Thanks again for watching. Don't be a colorist. If you're going to be something, at least be a racist. Get into their race. Get into who they are and, hate an individual for their individual actions and their individual form. Don't hate them just because of their skin color. That's insane. Because then you're going to hate other people because of their skin color. And guess what? Those other people are nothing like that person. They won't have the same culture. They won't have the same acts. They won't have the same form. So, try to figure out why you hate somebody, why you don't like them, and don't say, oh, it's because of your skin color. Say it's because you're this, 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 and this. And maybe you'd say, yeah, you hate me because I'm Romanian and because I stopped the Muslim hordes, which were, largely, African, hordes from, Turkey and whatnot that would have taken over most of Europe. And you hate me because, I was part of the, group of genetic line that stopped that, and maybe and so, but I would accept that. I'd accept that hate a lot more than saying your skin color is white and I don't like you. Fuck you. I don't care about your skin color. I don't like you because you don't like me. I'll fucking put you up on a fucking tree, and you're not going to be strange fruit. You're just going to be some fucking hanging dead body. It's not going to be a racial thing. It'll be because I don't like you. So fuck you. Don't be a colorist. Don't fucking make it so that your skin color is something that you're going to say makes it so you can do things that I can't do. I will never accept it in a million years. So, thanks everybody for watching. This has been another episode of the Pilfered Pyramid Podcast. I'm Samuel Mittler, and have a great day.